In the hour of its completion, the Death Star was the single most devastating superweapon that the galaxy had ever seen. The ability to obliterate a planet in a single shot was a power heretofore unheard of, even for the Sith. It took the rebellion risking everything and the intervention of the Force itself through Luke Skywalker to destroy the first Death Star. But Darth Sidious wasted no time on constructing yet another one 3 years later. Palpatine was so convinced that this weapon was meant to be the ultimate power in the universe. It was to be the catalyst by which he would cement his everlasting rule, at least until he grew to the point where he was so powerful that the Force itself would be able to replace it. But despite the second Death Star being larger and more powerful than the first, it was still under construction when it was attacked, which allowed the rebels to attack it openly and take it out yet again from the inside out. In Datacron's past, we have covered the histories, specifications, and even fun facts about the two DS orbital battle stations. With that said, these two specific superweapons are not where the story of the Death Star ends. As Yoda once said, there is another. Well, actually, there are two other Death Stars that we know about. Well, my friends, it's time for us to break open another piece of encrypted Imperial data to decipher the Empire's most classified information, and to learn the truth behind the plans of the third and the fourth Death Stars. But before we dive into that today, our spies have informed us that our communications have been compromised. Some of you who are watching have not yet subscribed. Luke's shot on the Death Star was 1 in a million, but luckily the subscribe button isn't. So lock on your targeting computers and blast it to pieces as you access our intel and uploads nearly every single day. Now, let's begin the briefing. The first of the obscure Death Star models is actually the first Death Star ever made, at least by technicality. Pieces of the real DS-1 battle station were under construction all throughout the Clone Wars, mostly by the Geonosians, and some of it was done by the Republic. But, as with every giant project, there has to be proof of concept. Enter the prototype Death Star, or as we'll refer to it, the DSP. When Palpatine placed Grand Moff Tarkin in charge of the project, Tarkin went away to a secret research facility that had been constructed for the Empire before it ever rose. In the deep core, there was a cluster of black holes referred to as the Maw. One would have to navigate the cluster in order to get to Kessel using a single real space pathway known as the Kessel Run. But within a small clearing in the Maw was where Tarkin established a facility that he aptly named the Maw Installation. This facility was known only to Tarkin himself and those that actually lived, worked, and operated on it. Surprisingly, not even Palpatine knew the exact location, which is shocking because Palpatine knew basically everything. But the Maw Installation was essentially a research center dedicated to nothing else but the construction of superweapons. The Death Star's architect, Pavel Lemelisk, led a team of scientists who were in charge of creating the super laser itself, their main job. While the actual battle station's plans had already been made, Palpatine still needed the actual weapon aspect to be refined, since nothing like it had ever been made or developed prior. Pavel Lemelisk, Dr. Key Zux, Tol Sivron, and a couple other scientists were the one involved in the design process of the Death Star's laser. And here, at the Maw Installation, they created the prototype, the first Death Star. The DSP was nothing but the giant spherical metal frame of the Death Star, a hyperdrive, a power source, a command deck, and of course, the super laser. That was it. No guts, no metal frame, no defense systems. The entire purpose of the prototype was to prove that the super laser could fit within the framework provided by the existing blueprints of the battle station. But do not be deceived, this prototype was fully operational, but there were a few differences. The first difference being its fire rate. The official DS-1 took a full 24 hours to recharge its super laser once it was fired, while the DSP only needed a mere 15 minutes. This would actually put it most closer in concept to the Death Star 2, which would charge for about only 3 minutes. The reason behind this is simple. The DS-1 had a single hypermatter reactor which served as its power generator. Since it had to share the other reactor between all of its systems, that included the onboard power, it required more time to recharge its systems since they were being split. The DS-2 had space for 3 hypermatter reactors though, 2 of which were dedicated entirely to the super laser, and 1 for the rest of the station's power, giving it a remarkable firing rate. But since the prototype only had the super laser and none of the guts of the DS-1, its reactor didn't have to share as much energy, allowing it a small 15-minute recharge period. However, this also comes at the expense of not being quite as powerful as the real operational laser. While Death Stars were known as being able to obliterate entire planets with the weapon, the prototype only had the power to destroy a planet's core and render it uninhabitable. Otherwise, it was totally capable of destroying moons, but that's about it. Its lower power was likely a result of a lie by Pavel Lemelisk, and that he told to the innocent Key Zux. A naive scientist, Key was under the impression that they at the Maw installation were created tools that would benefit society and the galaxy at large. She was instructed that the super laser of the Death Star was strictly for mining purposes, purely intended to destroy uninhabitable asteroids or moons in order to access precious minerals. The scientist had no idea the horrors that she was truly helping develop. Bavel likely altered the designs later on to give it much more power, which in turn made it require more energy from its reactor. A fatal oversight. The prototype was completed and then left unused for many years, since it had largely served its purpose only being proof of concept. But this would all change in 11 ABY, when the New Republic found out about the installation within the Maw. Tol Sivron and his colleagues boarded the DSP to flee the attack by the New Republic. After escaping out of the Maw and into the Kessel system, the crew began to repair the damage that they had sustained. Once it was fixed though, Sivron decided to test the super laser of the DSP, as none of them had actually seen it in action before. Using Kessel as a target, the prototype fired, but missed, as they had not actually calibrated its targeting systems correctly. In fact, they didn't do that at all. However, it did hit Kessel's moon and completely obliterated it. The station was driven off eventually by the Millennium Falcon and Mara Jade's pirate forces after a very brief battle. And although the crew would use the super laser to attack other ships, there again was no defense systems on board, no TIE fighter complement. So back into the Maw they went. After a quick meeting, Sivron and the other members decided to return to the Maw installation and to use the prototype to destroy the facility in order to keep their research from falling into the New Republic's hands. Upon arriving within the Maw, however, they were met by a large battle already taking place between Natasi Dalla's Imperial forces and the New Republic, who they had discovered now occupied the station. Admiral Dalla had been the one in charge of protecting the station, but had previously abandoned her duty to go on a warpath against the New Republic. Because of this, Sivron spitefully chose not to help her against her enemies, since she had abandoned them. Instead, he began to chase the Sun Crusher, which had arrived shortly thereafter. This was yet another superweapon designed at the Maw installation, but one that had been stolen away by a young Jedi student, Kip Duran. Unfortunately, the Sun Crusher was virtually invincible and extremely difficult to destroy. However, it had run out of resonance torpedoes that allowed it to destroy stars. So in order to take care of the Death Star prototype, Kip Duran baited Sivron into chasing him into the precarious path of the Maw cluster. Kip was force sensitive and was able to navigate his way through the treacherous route, but the giant DSP was having a much more difficult time and was caught up in one of the gravity wells. The prototype was then subsequently torn apart by the black hole, with Sivron and the rest of his crew going down with the ship. And that was technically the story of the first Death Star. The second of the obscure battle stations was actually the final Death Star, appropriately named the DS-3. This was the only Death Star made without Palpatine's approval. During Palpatine's reign, he had decided to gift his most loyal and devoted servants something known as the Worldcraft. A worldcraft was basically a small moon-sized artificial planetoid, which had the capability of flying in real space and hyperspace. It was a mobile planet with real forests, atmospheres, and even oceans. Within it was a hypermatter reactor core much like the Death Star, which powered all of its facilities, hyperdrives, and even a tractor beam. One of these creations was given to Enix Devian, a man who served as Palpatine's most loyal assassin, and who was trained by Darth Vader himself. After the Empire was defeated, Devian had created a faction called the Restored Empire, one which was separated from all the other petting warring factions that the Empire had shattered into. He then decided to distract the Rebel Alliance by converting the worldcraft given to him by Palpatine into yet another Death Star. The DS-3 underwent construction near the forest moon of Endor, with the purpose of being a surprise weapon to the New Republic. However, construction on it had begun in secret sometime either before or during the construction of the second Death Star, which is miraculous. Because of this, the DS-3 retained the design flaws of the DS-1. That flaw is one we all remember. It had a thermal exhaust port built into one of the trenches, and it was fully exposed just like the DS-1. However, it did have a heavier defense around it with a tight network of turbo lasers on its surface. A few months after the Battle of Endor though, Devian leaked the news of it and the plans that he had constructed a DS-3 battle station to the New Republic, who was still in its infancy and was based off of Endor. They were not going to allow yet another Death Star to exist though, so they promptly mobilized their forces to the DS-3, which was still undergoing construction. X-Wings went in with a similar plan as before, but this time with much more experience and a much more efficient method of taking care of Death Star pretenders and superweapons. However, something unexpected happened when a Starspeeder 3000 Star Tours vessel accidentally came into the conflict, putting the New Republic in a dangerous position. They then had to split their attention between fighting off TIE fighters, defending the inexperienced civilian vessel, and destroying the battle station. Luckily, their mission ended in a success with minimal casualties. However, the entire thing had been a feint by NX Deviant. He had wanted to distract the New Republic so that he could then attack their shipyards and steal a fleet's worth of vessels for his restored empire. The exact specifications of this Death Star are unfortunately not very well known, but it's possible that it wasn't even operational and was just built to look scary to the New Republic, forcing them to pour all of their resources into an attack, leaving them open to be stolen from essentially. But anyway guys, these were the other 2 Death Stars that many don't actually know about. And funnily enough, they were the very first and the very last ones, at least in Legends continuity. But anyway guys, tell us, did you already know about the prototype or the DS3? And if you feel as though your knowledge has been increased, then leave a comment down below on what other topics you would like us to explore and research in the lore. Until next time guys, thank you so much for joining us, and may the Force be with you.